The galaxy was vast, filled with countless civilizations, mighty fleets and ancient powers. Yet for all its scale, moments still came that froze it into silence, moments when even the most battle-hardened captains felt their blood turn cold. This was one of those moments. The hospital ship Mercy Dawn floated through the void, her hull painted a bright white, her sides marked with the unmistakable crimson symbols of peace and protection. Every galactic species knew those symbols. They meant one thing: this ship carried no weapons, no soldiers. Inside were only the sick, the wounded, and the helpless. No one attacked a hospital ship, not even the cruelest of raiders, not even in the darkest of wars. It was the one rule that almost everyone respected. But that night, the galaxy learned that rules could be broken. The Mercy Dawn was returning from the edge of a brutal warfront. Inside, doctors worked tirelessly, tending to hundreds of injured humans and alien civilians alike. Children lay in recovery bays, wrapped in medical blankets. The corridors hummed softly with the sounds of life support. It was a place of healing, a rare light in the endless dark. Then came the shadow. Sensors barely had time to register the incoming ships before the first salvo struck. The attackers didn't hail, didn't identify themselves, didn't even offer a demand. They came in silence, their weapons blazing. Explosions ripped through the Mercy Dawn's side. Alarms screamed. Medical staff scrambled to shield their patients, even as entire sections of the ship were torn apart. The crew begged over open channels. "This is a hospital ship. We are unarmed. Cease fire." Their words went unanswered. The attackers had not mistaken it for a warship. They had known exactly what it was, and still they fired. Witnesses from nearby freighters later said the Mercy Dawn burned brighter than a star as her core ruptured. One moment she drifted, wounded but alive. The next she was gone, shattered into molten debris, her screams swallowed by the void. Thousands of souls silenced in an instant. The galaxy reeled. The news spread like wildfire through trade routes and encrypted channels. Entire colonies stopped their work to listen. On mining stations, workers paused with drills in hand, staring in shock at the broadcasts. The hospital ship is gone. At first, some refused to believe it. Surely it had been an accident. Perhaps pirates, drunk with greed, hadn't realized what they were attacking. But the survivors who escaped in emergency pods spoke with shaking voices. They had seen the attackers, ships of the Draxian Empire, marked with their black and gold insignia. An empire known for cruelty, for enslaving the weak, for crushing rebellions. With firestorms, and now they had struck at the one vessel no one dared to touch. Why? The answer was whispered in every corner of the galaxy. It was not strategy, it was not a mistake, it was a message. The Draxians wanted to show that nothing was sacred, that even the symbols of peace could be destroyed if they chose, that the galaxy should bow to them or burn. On Earth, the news was delivered with trembling voices. Families gathered around screens, staring at the list of the lost. The Mercy Dawn had carried not only soldiers recovering from battle, but also children being evacuated from war zones, scientists who had been caught in crossfire, and alien civilians who had begged humanity for sanctuary. Entire families wiped out, names scrolling endlessly across the screens. Some wept, others sat in silence, too stunned to cry. And then came the rage. For humanity, mercy had always been a choice, but vengeance, that was something bred deep into their bones. In the Draxian halls of power, the attack was celebrated. Generals raised their voices in triumph, declaring that the galaxy would now fear them even more. The Emperor himself laughed at the thought of humans grieving. "They are weak," he said. "They cling to emotions. They will mourn, but they will not act. Fear will chain them, as it chains the others." The Draxians had fought humans before. They had seen Earth's ships, had studied their tactics. To them, humanity was dangerous only when pushed in open battle, but predictable, emotional, and unwilling to commit to true, merciless war. Destroying the hospital ship was meant to be a warning, but it would soon prove to be their gravest mistake. The galaxy buzzed with speculation. Would humanity remain silent? Would they bring the matter to the Galactic Council, only to be drowned out by endless debates and cowardly politics? Some thought so. Others whispered of something darker. Freighter crews claimed they had seen entire human fleets vanish from their orbital docks, their coordinates erased from traffic records. Colonists reported strange convoys moving in the night, carrying munitions and fuel in silence. When asked, Earth officials gave no answer. The only response was silence, a silence that grew heavier by the day. In hidden shipyards orbiting Jupiter, massive engines roared to life. Dreadnoughts, long kept in reserve, powered up their reactors. Carriers loaded with drone swarms took on supplies. On Mars, soldiers stood in endless lines, armor gleaming under harsh lights as they received their orders. On Luna, engineers whispered prayers over warheads sealed into armored casings. Earth did not scream its anger. It did not make grand speeches. It prepared, quietly, relentlessly. The galaxy had seen humanity's fury before, in small wars and isolated battles, but never like this. Never united, never focused. At the heart of it all stood Admiral Raines, a man carved from iron and silence. He had been a child when the first human colonies had been attacked decades ago, and he had sworn that one day Earth would never be caught unprepared again. When the hospital ship's wreckage reached his desk, he didn't shout. He didn't cry. He simply stared at the image of the white hull torn apart, the crimson insignia blackened with fire. Then he gave the order. Activate Fleet of Fury. The room fell silent. Officers exchanged grim looks. The words had been spoken at last. A code phrase, known only to the highest ranks. It meant one thing: there would be no negotiations, no treaties, no mercy. Humanity would strike. Weeks later, in the quiet hours before dawn, Earth's skies darkened. Thousands looked up, watching as entire formations of ships rose from their cradles, breaking atmosphere with thunderous flames. They did not broadcast their destination. They did not announce their numbers. The fleet moved in silence, a wall of steel and firepower gliding into the stars. Civilians on Earth watched with a mixture of fear and awe, knowing that history itself was shifting. On distant stations, alien observers whispered as the human fleet passed. Some prayed the humans would succeed. Others prayed they would fail, fearing what would happen if Earth became unstoppable. But one truth was clear: the galaxy had woken something it could not control. As the last ship vanished into the dark, Admiral Raines stood on the bridge of his flagship. Before him stretched the endless void, filled with enemies who believed humanity would cower. He spoke softly, but his words carried across the fleet. "They wanted to send us a message," he said. "Now, we will answer." The fleet accelerated, engines blazing like furious stars, and the galaxy trembled, for it knew Earth was coming. The galaxy had mocked humanity for generations. They were called reckless, too quick to anger, too emotional to endure the long games of empires. The ancient powers dismissed Earth as a loud, dangerous upstart that would eventually burn itself out. And yet, when the hospital ship burned, the same voices that once laughed suddenly grew silent. The attack had shocked even the most hardened leaders. No one expected the Draxian Empire to go so far. They had struck not at warriors, not at fleets, but at the helpless. Everyone had assumed Earth would cry out in protest, perhaps demand justice through the Galactic Council. The Council would argue, debate, stall, and bury the crime under layers of politics. Then time would pass, and the galaxy would forget. That was what had always happened before, but this time was different. Humanity did not cry out. Humanity did not ask. Humanity prepared. On the surface of Mars, under the red skies, massive war factories thundered without pause. Automated assembly lines produced endless crates of missiles, railgun slugs, and drone swarms. Soldiers marched in silence through the dust, their boots striking the ground with perfect rhythm. In orbit, shipyards glowed with furious energy as old vessels were brought out of retirement and new ones were armed with fresh weapons. On Luna, engineers whispered to each other in awe as ancient codes were entered into consoles. Hidden silos opened. Massive warheads, silent, patient, waiting for decades, were brought into the light. The whispers spread faster than light. Merchant crews reported convoys of military supplies moving under heavy escort. Civilian communications carried only fragments, but the fragments told enough. A storm was gathering on Earth, and the galaxy could feel the air grow heavy with its approach. Admiral Rains stood at the heart of it. On his command deck, he watched screens flicker with reports from across the solar system. He had served through endless skirmishes, border conflicts, and council squabbles. He knew the enemy believed humanity would fight like before, fierce but limited. They did not understand what had changed. Rains understood. The moment the hospital ship had fallen, humanity's restraint had died with it. His officers gathered. Around him, tense but ready. Their faces were pale with anger, their eyes hard with purpose. One spoke softly. "Admiral, the fleet is assembled." Rains said nothing at first. He turned his gaze to the star map before him. Dozens of fleets drawn from Earth, Mars, Luna, and the colonies floated like predators waiting to strike. Battleships with armor thick enough to withstand planetary bombardment, carriers loaded with swarms of autonomous strikecraft, dreadnoughts bristling with weapons humanity had sworn never to use unless the worst came. This was the worst. He gave the order in a voice as steady as stone. "Commence Fleet of Fury. Launch sequence. Begin." The words spread like wildfire across encrypted channels. Entire starports came alive. Massive engines roared, lighting up the void with white fire. Civilians across Earth looked up from their cities, seeing the skies crack open as steel leviathans climbed into orbit. Children watched with wide eyes. Elders whispered that they had seen this only once before, long ago, when Earth had fought for its very survival. But never with so many ships. Never with such silence. For silence was humanity's answer now. The fleet did not broadcast threats. No speeches were made to the galaxy. No demands for justice were issued. Only movement, precise, relentless, unstoppable. The Galactic Council gathered in haste, their chambers filled with nervous voices. Some argued that humanity must be restrained, that they would destroy balance in the galaxy. Others, remembering the fire of Earth's wars, said nothing, fearing that even a single word against them would make them a target. The Draxians laughed. In their palaces of black stone, their generals drank and boasted. They believed humans could not match their numbers, could not sustain a war beyond their borders. "Let them come," one commander said, raising a glass. "We will grind them down. They will weep as they always do." But even as they laughed, rumors reached them. Entire outposts near human space had gone dark. Draxian patrol fleets vanished, without distress calls. Merchant ships whispered of shadows crossing the stars, vast, silent armadas bearing no lights, no signals. The truth was spreading. The human fleet had awakened. From the edge of the solar system, the first armada slipped into the void. Their engines burned only for seconds before going dark, their hulls vanishing into silence as they entered FTL. They did not roar, they did not announce, they simply left, carrying their vengeance across the stars. On Earth, families stood in streets, watching the skies. They knew the fleet would not return unchanged, some would never return at all. But they also knew this: the galaxy would never forget what came next. On his flagship, Admiral Rains stood alone for a moment, gazing into the black. His hand rested on the console, his thoughts heavy. He thought of the hospital ship, of the children whose lives had been stolen. He thought of the Draxians' laughter. His voice carried across the fleet as he spoke at last. The enemy believes us weak. They believe us broken. Let us teach them the price of their mistake. Engines roared once more, the sound like thunder rolling across the stars. The fleet leapt forward, a storm of steel and fire. And across the galaxy, in darkened halls and hidden chambers, countless beings shivered. Humanity was moving. Humanity was silent. And silence in the cold of space was more terrifying than any scream. The fleet of fury had awakened. The first strike did not come with warning. It came with fire. The Draxian Empire had grown used to fear. Their fleets patrolled their borders with arrogance, their admirals certain that no one would dare challenge them. The attack on the hospital ship had only made them bolder. To them, humanity was emotional, yes, but predictable. They expected Earth to weep, to shout, to beg the Council for help. They did not expect silence, and silence was exactly what followed, until the stars above their supply world lit up. The planet of Vornak was a jewel in the Draxian supply chain. Shipyards orbited its skies, building cruisers and repairing warships. Fuel depots filled entire orbital rings. Thousands of workers lived in its stations, confident that the Empire would protect them. It was considered untouchable, too far from Earth, too heavily defended. That night every defense turned to ash. Without warning, human ships tore through the void. They had crossed light years without detection, emerging in the shadow of the system's sun. The first salvo was not a probing strike, it was an execution. Railgun slugs, traveling faster than thought, ripped through shipyards. Missiles screamed across the black, guided by cold precision. Drone swarms poured from hidden carriers, slicing apart defense platforms before their alarms had even finished ringing. On the surface of Vornak, civilians watched the sky erupt. Brilliant arcs of fire lit up the heavens. Massive structures fell, glowing like falling stars as they disintegrated in the atmosphere. The workers realized, with growing terror, that the enemy was not here to disable or frighten. Humanity had come to destroy. Draxian fleets scrambled, their warships rising from their docks in panic. But the humans were already among them. Sleek destroyers darted in and out of formation, cutting through larger vessels with surgical precision. Carriers unleashed coordinated strikes, their drones overwhelming the Draxian ships before they could even form proper lines. There was no mercy, no warning, no hesitation. Broadcasts from the battle carried across the galaxy. Grainy, intercepted. Footage showed human warships marked with a single, terrible symbol painted on their hulls, the red insignia of the hospital ship that had been destroyed. Every missile carried the same mark. Every drone bore it like a banner of vengeance. The message was clear. Humanity had not forgotten. Humanity would never forget. One Draxian commander, his ship burning around him, managed to send a desperate transmission. His voice shook with disbelief. They are not fighting as before. They do not maneuver to spare. They do not offer surrender. They strike, and then they kill. What have we awakened? His words cut off as his ship detonated. The explosion, visible even from the surface below. The battle lasted less than an hour. When it ended, Vornak was a graveyard. The great shipyards were gone, reduced to drifting wreckage. The fuel depots burned like suns. Of the defending fleet, none survived. And then, just as swiftly as they had come, the human fleet vanished back into the dark. The galaxy trembled. News of the strike spread faster than the speed of light. Every species, every colony, every ruler watched in stunned silence. For centuries, the Draxians had been the predators, the ones who struck without mercy. But now, their prey had turned, and it was more terrifying than anyone imagined. The Galactic Council met in emergency session. Some demanded that humanity be restrained before their fury consumed entire sectors. Others whispered that, perhaps, the Draxians deserved this, but no one dared to act. Not yet. In the Draxian capital, panic set in. The Emperor raged, smashing artifacts and cursing his admirals. How had the humans crossed so far, so fast? How had their fleets arrived undetected? No answers came. Only silence, and silence was worse than any threat, for the humans had spoken, not with words but with fire. They had shown the galaxy what vengeance looked like, and all knew this was only the beginning. Far across the stars, on the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Rains watched the last feeds from Vornak's destruction. His officers waited, their eyes reflecting the burning light of shattered worlds. He spoke only once. This was justice for the Mercy Dawn. But justice is not finished. The fleet turned, engines glowing faintly, preparing for the next strike, and, in the cold silence of space, the galaxy realized the truth. Humanity was not simply at war. Humanity was hunting. The galaxy had never been so restless. Whispers traveled faster than any ship, faster than light, faster than truth. Whole sectors of space buzzed with one story. The humans had struck back, and they had done it with fire. The destruction of Vornak's shipyards sent shockwaves across every star system. Worlds that once trembled before the Draxian Empire now whispered in fear of something new, the silent fleets of Earth. Trade routes emptied, ships refusing to pass anywhere near Draxian space. Neighboring empires pulled back their ambassadors and locked their borders, fearing that the fire would spread. The name Fleet of Fury began as a rumor. No one knew who first spoke it, but the words clung to the air like smoke. Soon, even the news channels of neutral planets began to call it that. The Fleet of Fury, vengeance made real, steel and fire given form. The Draxians tried to control the story. They announced that Vornak had been only a temporary setback, that new shipyards were already being built, that their fleets were gathering to crush the humans once and for all. But their voices shook, and the galaxy could hear the cracks in their pride, for the truth was undeniable. Humanity was moving like a storm through the stars, and no one knew where the next lightning strike would fall. In the mining colonies along the rim, workers looked to the skies every night, half in fear and half in hope. Some of them whispered prayers to the humans, asking them to come and free them from Draxian rule. Others prayed just as hard that the humans would pass them by, for fear of being caught in the blaze. On a distant world enslaved for generations, children painted crude symbols of the red insignia, the mark of the destroyed hospital ship, onto the walls of their cities. To them, it had become more than vengeance. It was a promise. But for the Draxians, it was a nightmare. Entire fleets were redirected from their borders, dragged back to defend the core worlds. Commanders argued endlessly over where the humans might strike next. Some said the fleet would target the Empire's treasury worlds. Others swore the humans would aim for their communications hubs. No one could agree, and in that confusion, the humans thrived. From the black of space, Admiral Rains watched with cold eyes as his fleets spread out like shadows across the stars. They struck not only with weapons, but with fear. Small groups of human ships jumped into distant systems, released a single broadcast of the Mercy Dawn burning, and vanished again. They left no wreckage, no trace, only terror. Entire Draxian. Patrols began to surrender without a fight, their crews too shaken to face the humans. Others abandoned their posts entirely, deserting into the void. The Empire's strength was cracking from the inside, not just from the human guns. On the Galactic Council floor, chaos reigned. Delegates shouted over one another, some demanding that humanity be stopped before they grew too powerful, others begging the council to do nothing and let the Draxians burn. No one could agree. No one dared to take the first step. And always the humans said nothing. No speeches, no demands. No diplomacy, only silence, silence and fire. One Draxian noble, desperate to save his own power, begged his emperor to sue for peace. "They will not stop," he warned. "Not until every world we own is ash. Surrender now, before the empire is gone." The emperor struck him down on the spot, declaring that fear was weakness, that the humans would break as all others had broken before them. But in the shadows of his palace, even his most loyal advisors began to wonder. Could the humans truly be stopped? From the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Rains watched the flames of another Draxian supply base vanish into the void. He said nothing for a long time, letting the silence hang heavy across the command deck. Finally, he spoke. "They thought fear was their weapon. Now let them learn what fear truly means." His words carried like thunder, though spoken in a quiet voice. Around him, his officers nodded with grim resolve. The fleet of fury spread further into the dark, unseen and unstoppable. No one knew where they would strike next. And in the endless black of space, the shadows themselves seemed to whisper, humanity was coming. The galaxy shivered. The Draxian Empire had never been humiliated like this. Their fleets, once feared across the stars, now limped back to their home sectors, bloodied and broken. Worlds that once whispered their name in fear now spoke it with doubt. Even their allies began to drift away, pretending not to see the collapse that had begun. The Emperor would not allow it. His pride was iron, his fury boundless. He gathered his war council and demanded a single plan: crush humanity in one strike. And so, the greatest fleet in centuries was assembled. From across the Empire, warships were recalled. Battleships, cruisers, carriers, destroyers, even ancient leviathans long kept in dry dock were dragged out and armed for war. The numbers swelled into the tens of thousands. Propaganda blared across Draxian space, promising victory. The humans are reckless, they are weak, they fight with anger, not strength. When they see our true power, they will kneel as all others have knelt. But beneath the speeches, fear lingered. Entire crews deserted before launch. Civilians whispered of burned shipyards and shattered outposts. Children woke screaming in the night, dreaming of human warships with burning eyes. Still, the fleet launched, a tide of steel and fire, filling the stars as it moved. The Draxians laughed again, convinced that humanity could never stand against such numbers. But humanity was waiting. When the Draxian fleet entered the border of human space, they found the skies already alive with light. Dozens of human warships appeared on their scanners, then hundreds, then more. The Draxians realized too late that Earth had known exactly when and where they would strike. The trap was sprung. From the void poured carriers unleashing endless swarms of drones, tiny machines that cut through Draxian defenses like knives. Human. Battleships fired coordinated salvos, their railguns cracking across the stars with thunder that could be felt even inside armored hulls. Missiles screamed into formations, each one painted with the red insignia of the destroyed hospital ship. Draxians fought with fury. Their numbers were overwhelming, their formations disciplined, but they were fighting an enemy who had no intention of retreating, no hesitation, no mercy. Humanity fought not for territory, not for conquest, but for vengeance. Entire wings of Draxian ships were torn apart before they could even lock targets. Commanders screamed orders into comms, only to realize their fleets were dissolving into chaos. The humans struck in perfect silence. No wasted words, no wasted shots. In the middle of the battle, the Draxian flagship broadcast a desperate message to the entire sector. "We are engaged with the human fleet. Their numbers are greater than expected. Their tactics unpredictable. The message ended in static as a human dreadnought's railgun tore the ship in half. The galaxy watched. Intercepted transmissions, live feeds, even smuggled reports flooded across the stars. Billions of eyes saw the might of the Draxian Empire break apart like glass. When the battle ended, the void was filled with wreckage. Burning hulks drifted silently, broken fleets reduced to debris fields. Of the massive Draxian armada, only fragments escaped, and they carried the terror of what they had faced. The humans did not chase the survivors. They did not need to. The message had already been carved into the stars. On his flagship, Admiral Rains stood over the tactical display, watching the wreckage float. His officers were silent, their eyes wide at the scale of the victory. Rains spoke at last, his voice steady. They thought numbers would save them. They thought pride would shield them. Now they know this is the price of their arrogance. And with a single order, the fleet turned toward its next target. The galaxy had thought humanity's fury would burn quickly, like a flame. But it was not a flame, it was a storm, growing larger with every strike. And now, with the Draxians broken and bleeding, that storm was only just beginning. The Draxian Empire had been feared for generations. Its fleets had ruled the stars, its soldiers had burned worlds into ash, and its rulers had spoken with voices that carried terror across the galaxy. But now, that same empire shook from within. After the failed retaliation, after the destruction of their great fleet, the illusion of Draxian power was shattered. Entire sectors went quiet. Colonies refused to send tribute. Governors hid behind private armies, fearing rebellion from their own citizens. The chain of command that once held their empire together began to crack link by link. On the streets of their core worlds, people whispered words that would have been unthinkable weeks before. The humans, they cannot be stopped. Murals of Draxian conquests were defaced. Statues of past emperors were pulled down. Fear had shifted, no longer pointed outward at humanity, but inward at the weakness of their own rulers. The emperor tried to tighten his grip. New decrees were issued, harsher punishments, forced conscriptions, executions of those who spoke of defeat. But fear cannot be commanded away. Every broadcast, every punishment, only reminded the people that the empire was bleeding, and humanity made sure that wounds stayed open. The human fleet struck with precision, never staying long enough to be trapped, never wasting firepower. They appeared over Draxian worlds, destroyed shipyards, shattered supply lines, then vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Each time, the human ships carried the same insignia, the red mark of the destroyed hospital ship, painted boldly, where every sensor could see it. To the Draxians, it was more than just a fleet. It was a phantom, a reminder of vengeance that never rested. Entire fleets surrendered without a fight. Some commanders even abandoned their ships, leaving them adrift in space rather than face the humans again. Reports poured into the Emperor's chambers. Deserters, riots, mutiny. One captured Draxian admiral, speaking before a human tribunal, said words that echoed across the stars. We feared no one. We crushed all who resisted. But the humans, they do not fight like others. They fight like a people who will never forgive. We are not their enemy. We are their lesson. The galaxy watched with wide eyes. Neighboring civilizations once too, afraid to defy the Draxians, began to rise. Old rebellions reignited, hidden resistance groups suddenly grew bold, and everywhere when they struck, they carried human banners, real or imagined, claiming alliance with Earth's vengeance. The empire was crumbling, not only from human firepower, but from the weight of its own sins. The people it had ruled, with cruelty now turned against it. The empire had thought itself eternal. Now it was dying in the span of weeks. On the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Rains studied the reports in silence. His officers looked at him with questions they dared not voice. The Draxians were breaking faster than anyone had imagined. Finally, Rains spoke, his tone grim. This was never just about one ship. This is about every life they thought worthless. And we will make sure they remember it until their last star falls dark. The order was given. The fleet turned again, not toward a single world, but toward the heart of the Empire itself. The humans would not stop. The storm was not fading, it was growing. And the galaxy, watching from every corner, realized one truth. The Draxian Empire's reign of terror was ending, not in silence but in fire. The Draxian homeworld had always been untouchable. For centuries, it was the iron heart of the Empire, a world wrapped in fleets, bristling with defenses, and shielded by the belief that no enemy could ever reach it. To strike at it was unthinkable. To even suggest it was treason. But humanity had never cared for what the galaxy thought possible. When the human fleet appeared at the edge of the Draxian system, every sensor, every outpost, every watchtower lit up with alarms. Admirals barked, orders, planetary defenses scrambled, and citizens poured into bunkers. For the first time in their history, the Draxians felt the terror they had inflicted on others. The humans advanced in silence. No broadcast, no demand, no warning. Their ships drifted forward like shadows across the stars, weapons charged, formation unbroken. It was not a fleet on patrol. It was a blade, pointed straight at the Empire's throat. The Draxians fired first. Dozens of defense stations unleashed their cannons, their beams lancing across the void. But the humans moved with precision, weaving between the fire, countering with strikes that shattered defenses in seconds. Entire stations went dark before they could reload. Panic spread through the Draxian ranks. Fleets tried to regroup, but human railguns and missiles tore through them with merciless efficiency. Crews abandoned ships, ejecting escape pods into the void. Even those who fought to the last knew the truth. They were not holding the line, they were only delaying the inevitable. On the homeworld below, the Emperor stood in his palace, surrounded by generals who shouted conflicting orders. Reports screamed. Through the air, destroyed fleets, broken defenses, orbital stations falling one by one. The humans were coming closer, and then, for the first time, humanity spoke. A single transmission cut through every frequency, reaching every ship, every city, every screen. It was Admiral Rains, his voice steady and cold. You struck a hospital ship. You killed the unarmed, the wounded, the helpless. You thought it would break us. Instead, it forged us. Today, we are not here for conquest. We are here for reckoning. The words echoed across the Empire. Soldiers faltered, civilians froze, leaders trembled. Humanity was not here to negotiate. They were here to deliver judgment. The bombardment began. Human ships unleashed fire upon the outer defenses, carving through them with brutal precision. One by one, the Draxian shields collapsed. The skies over their capital burned, streaked with the light of descending human weapons. But the humans did not destroy the world in a single strike. No, they dragged the moment out. Every shield that fell, every station that broke, every fleet that scattered was another reminder of what they had done. This was not just war. This was a lesson written in fire. Across the galaxy, billions watched the live feeds smuggled out of Draxian space. Species that had once bowed to the Empire now whispered in awe. Some cheered, others prayed. All understood that the age of the Draxians was ending, and humanity was the hand delivering that end. On the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Rains gave his final order. The fleet adjusted course, weapons trained on the last great defense ring surrounding the homeworld. The storm had arrived at the Empire's gates, and now the reckoning would fall. The Draxian capital burned. Smoke rose into the skies as shattered defense rings fell in pieces across the horizon. Cities that had once been monuments to empire and power now trembled in silence. The Draxians had always believed their world would never see war, never know defeat, never hear the voice of an enemy from above. But now the voice came, and it came from Earth. Every screen, every channel, every frequency in the Draxian system was overridden. Static cleared, and the image of Admiral Rains filled the void. His uniform was scorched from battle, his expression calm but hard. Behind him, the human fleet drifted in perfect silence, weapons still glowing, waiting for his word. The galaxy held its breath. Billions tuned in across hidden channels, desperate to hear what humanity would say. The victors of this war, the avengers of the hospital ship, had the galaxy's full attention. Rains began to speak, his voice slow, steady, and heavy with the weight of judgment. You called yourselves rulers, you called yourselves untouchable, and to prove it, you fired on a hospital ship, a ship of children, a ship of the dying. A ship that carried no weapons, no threat, only lives. You thought it would silence us. You thought we would bow. You thought humanity would break. But hear me now, Draxians. Hear me, Galaxy. Humanity does not forgive such crimes. Humanity does not forget. And today we answer. Not with words, not with negotiations, but with fire. The feed cut to live images of Draxian fleets shattered, of defenses burning, of debris fields glittering in the dark. Then it returned to Rains, his eyes fixed not only on the Draxian people, but on every world watching across the stars. This is not conquest. We do not want your throne. We do not want your worlds. We want only this, that every empire, every ruler, every fleet in this galaxy remembers what happens when mercy is betrayed. You do not strike the helpless. You do not target the unarmed. And if you do, then know this, Earth will come, and Earth will answer. Silence followed his words. Then, without another signal, the human fleet began to withdraw. Ship by ship, they turned from the Draxian homeworld, engines burning as they slipped back into the void. The Draxians were left in ruins, their empire broken, their rulers disgraced. But Earth did not take their worlds. Humanity left them to face their own collapse, their own shame. Across the galaxy, the message spread like wildfire. In every council chamber, in every war room, in every back alley where whispers traveled faster than light, one truth was spoken. Humanity had come of age. Humanity had shown its teeth, and the galaxy would never look at Earth the same way again. On the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Rains stood with his crew as the stars stretched before them. For the first time since the hospital ship was destroyed, his voice carried something other than iron. It carried finality. They will remember, he said softly. That's enough. And with that, the fleet disappeared into the deep void, leaving behind not just wreckage and fear, but a final message carved into the stars themselves. Earth will not be broken.